I'm Michael Knowles, here to tell you that Rules for Retrogrades, the book and the show, are out now, and you absolutely need to check it out before the thought police confiscate all of it and lock you away.
Rules for Retrogrades out today. Counter disruption. We're disrupting the plans of the radicals. Everyone pick up a copy if you don't already have one. And if you do have one, please leave a review in all the relevant places so that we get it into the hands of all the people that need it. Rules for Retrogrades. Rise.
Welcome, parish orphans and retrogrades, to a Sankt Gallen Mafia show today, an episode revisiting the Sankt Gallen Mafia, what it is, developments. The main development is a really important book that I've been excited about, that I've had the privilege to read, by Miss Julia Meloni, who is a freelance writer at 1 Peter 5. You've read some of her writing at LifeSite News, and you've probably read some of it at Crisis Magazine. She's freelance, though. She does what she wants. And today she's come on with me at Rules for Retrogrades. How are you doing, Julie?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it's really good to see you again. And we've done a couple interviews before on related to topics. Now we return to the Sankt Gallen Mafia. I was waiting for someone to write a book like this. I've got my head in three from my part, so I cannot write this book. And I don't know, I don't have the investigative powers you evidently do, because let me just say, I've read the first couple chapters, and you're a really good writer, number one. And two, the narrative voice is excellent. And you just seem to have a lot of facts that I've looked for in the past. How did you research this thing?
Yeah, that's a great question. I went into this knowing that I wanted to get my hands on the repository of information, and I knew that it would be in scattered places, even though we have the biography of Cardinal Godfrey Daniels that, kind of broadcasted everything about the mafia.
Yeah.
It was still a partial confession. So basically just looking at a lot of different sources in different languages has been how I've progressed on this. I have a great translator. Whenever I have a reading knowledge of different languages, and whenever I would find something that looked really good, I would just get my translator to translate word for word for me. And that way I just was able to find a lot of information. I actually, here's an example, like this is the book. You'll recognize some of the stuff in some of the big stuff in the first couple chapters is from this book, and it's in French. This is an example of one of the Italian sources that comes up. So basically my shelves are just lined with books from so many different languages. Anything, if it had something to do with the mafia, I was happy to spend the money and get the book. I got shipments from other countries. So that's basically kind of the hook for getting the new information.
Look, it paid off. Honestly, you're an excellent writer, and simply put, there are lots of facts about the Sankt Gallen Mafia for a year and a half, from about late 2018, a little bit before, until really I started reading your book. I would run once every 4 months, 3 times a year, a quick Google search. And back on Marshall's channel with the TNT show, we did like 2 or 3 shows on the Sankt Gallen Mafia. And honestly, one there is on the basis of a Google search, kind of just recycling the same old information. This is brand new, and so one could even call it breaking. For one thing, I had never even heard of the picture I'd like to talk to you about, entitled Visit Among Friends, proving that the Sankt Gallen Mafia does exist. It's not just the usual suspects of Francis haters or Francis opposition, which is quite an ironic slur for people that are interested in the Sankt Gallen Mafia, because there was a real group of Benedict opposition, and they were known as the Sankt Gallen Mafia. Anyway, you talk about this picture that proves that the meetings did happen, and It's called, anodyne enough, A Visit Among Friends, like something from Winnie the Pooh. Where'd you find out about this picture?
So I found out about this from, of all places, the tablet, the left-leaning Catholic, very mainstream left-leaning Catholic magazine. I have, and the reference will be, definitely like right there in the book, the exact place where you can read about this picture. But I've heard other people, there's a French priest, I think Father Claude Barth, who talks about this same picture as well. So we have corroboration in a couple different places. I have tried to get my hands on the picture, tried to look at it. I'm still working on that. It's something that appears to have been published by Achille Silvestrini. He replaced Cardinal Carlo Maria Martini in the Mafia when Martini became too sick. And as you know from the book, Silvestrini kind of emerges as this character that we in the English-speaking world haven't talked enough about. And so, yeah, there's this kind of sense that it looks like Silvestrini leaked the picture on purpose in a small publication that he ran, for a small publication that belonged to the residence that he lived in. So it's kind of an interesting dynamic going on there, where they kind of want people to know about this, in a way.
Yeah, because to some extent, we already know that Daniils joked about it and was kind of proud about it. I mean, it like I said, it's the whole thing's kind of Winnie the Pooh. It's a bunch of old white German guys. It's strange that we talk about it as if it should cue the suspense music in a horror film or something, but it does. I mean, 20th century being what it was, we know a bunch of old German guys can do a tremendous amount of harm, which I maybe shouldn't joke about. But the fact of the matter is, it's at one time seems really anodyne. The most boring humans on earth are a bunch of old German guys, but at the same time, it's really, really interesting. And like you say, there are two cardinals that emerge as more important. There's Silvestrini and there's Martini. Martini, who is the Don. Would you say a little bit about these two guys and about the other 3 or 4 founding members? We've lots of shows have been done on this, but just to get us going, introduce us, as it were, to these guys.
Yeah. So Martini, this was his project. This was part of his dream. So Martini was the basically the leading light of the liberals for many decades. There was a picture that appeared of him on a newspaper in 1993 that asked if he was the next pope. So it was the dream was to get Martini elected as pope. He got Parkinson's disease. That dream faded away. Now, Silvestrini was an Italian diplomat, and he was very close to John Paul II. And in, I believe, around 2003, he replaced Martini in the group because Martini was too sick. And Silvestrini, the people who know him best say that he was a politician, he was a maneuverer. He was the one who was really interested in tactics. So the idea of the succession of Pope John Paul II was very important to him. And he's the one who, it appears, identified Bergoglio as the key candidate to try to push forward at the 2005 election.
Now, wasn't the first meeting ever of the Sankt Gallen Silvestrini's pad there, or was he came later? I was unclear on that.
Yeah, great question. He came later. It's actually the first meeting appears to have been in Germany, in the Diocese of Casper in the mid 90s, and then they moved to Sankt Gallen, and then they met every year at or near Sankt Gallen. And then Silvestrini's apartment, that was kind of in the lead up to the 2005 conclave, where they met there. To my understanding, they met at least 2 times. They met 3 days after the funeral of John Paul II, and they were talking at that point about the absolute imperative of stopping Ratzinger. And then they met one more time in his apartment on the eve of the conclave, and that's where the mafia members kind of confirmed that they were going to vote for Bergoglio.
Right. Now, there's a couple things I want to... The absolute necessity of stopping Ratzinger and the absolute necessity of selecting Bergoglio to be the one to do it. This, from my perspective in 2020, late 2020, seems like a bit of a false right at the time versus a false left. I mean, not a false right in Benedict, but an underwhelming right-winger. If he's the paragon of right-wingism, he's a bit underwhelming. At the time, I mean, Francis has become the sort of leftist Ubermensch, but at the time he really wasn't. He was a Peronist, was known for standing against what Silvestrini's views in a couple of ways. Didn't he have kind of a... Silvestrini wasn't ever convinced, initially anyway, that Bergoglio was sufficiently left. Why did it have to be Bergoglio? And why was Ratzinger such a threat to them? Well, couldn't they have gotten a further left guy to represent them as against a further right enemy?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would think about it in a very concrete instance that might kind of shed light on it. And it's an instance that is kind of very, very relevant to recent news from the past couple months. The instance is that 2003 declaration from the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith that talked about the necessity of bishops standing up for not redefining marriage and standing up against same-sex civil unions, that sort of thing. That sort of thing is what Ratzinger stood for. And Bergoglio in 2002, Austin Ivory talks a lot about how Bergoglio, when there was a civil unions, some legislation in Buenos Aires, that Bergoglio didn't want to fight against it because basically the idea was he thought it was okay. It didn't really touch the definition of marriage. That was something separate. I think the revolutionaries, they understood the significance of this sort of thing, where if you could have Bergoglio saying these kinds of things in 2002, what could you have Bergoglio doing a decade or 2 decades down the line, right? And Ratzinger, I really think they knew that he had some I don't know, that he had some loopholes possibly, and you mentioned kind of the underwhelming nature of his conservatism. They knew that they possibly could have had someone stronger on that area, but I think that they thought, practically speaking, Ratzinger's the man to stop.
Yeah, in some sense he was. It just the reform of the reform came too slowly, as we know now. And that's because he resigned. He abdicated. Now, there's one key. I thought you might want to hold this till publication, but you green-lighted me to go ahead with the question. There's some indication in my mind that this lunch you speak of, a lunchtime, a conclave luncheon where they were, I think, locked in voting, might have given the go-ahead for Ratzinger to go ahead and be elected. He met with, was it Silvestrini?
Martini.
Martini. Okay. Yeah, the Don himself. And at that lunch, after that lunch, I should say, everything seemed to change. The conditions for the possibility of his election were set. And it seems that they came to some agreement. Am I insinuating too much? Or I don't know what you say about it later in the book, but could this have been a kind of conditioned precedent set for Ratzinger, Joseph Cardinal Ratzinger's eventual abdication 7 or 8 years in?
Yeah, yeah, a very, very important question. I so this lunch that you're speaking about, it's at the end of the third scrutiny of the conclave, um, before the fourth scrutiny that where Ratzinger won the papacy. So Martini and Ratzinger are seen arm in arm, and at least one eyewitness to this meeting thought that that Martini had given his votes to Ratzinger with possibly this agreement that you alluded to. Um, Martini, it was interesting because soon after all of this, Martini started speaking about how we should expect beautiful surprises from right. from the new Pope Benedict. I think that it's a mystery, and the way that I present it in the book, I kind of describe what has been reported about it and kind of leave it as a mystery at that first chapter, and then kind of come back in a later chapter, kind of pointing to some later episodes that build on the mystery. But I think two things. The first thing I would say about it is Ratzinger always denied that there had been some sort of electoral agreement where he would get votes and then he would enact a certain program, like a Martini program.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one important thing. And then the second important thing, though, is that it's fairly common knowledge that when Martini died, before he'd right around that time, a little bit afterward, his confessor came forward and said that Martini told Benedict to resign, and basically said that there had been some kind of understanding. I don't know if agreement is exactly the right word. Maybe some kind of understanding that if he couldn't reform the Curia, he would have to leave. So this is very, very ominous talk, and I think. I would just say that I don't think that there was some sort of clear pact. I take seriously what Benedict says, when he says that there was not a pact. But do I think that Martini said something, intervened in some way that kind of set a ball in motion to where the resignation would seem more likely? I think that's something we can kind of investigate further.
To be fair, Pope Benedict also said that he was dying and on his way out of life, like almost 8 years ago. And that didn't, I think he's, not that his credibility is wholly shot, but his credibility as per the chair of Peter, there seems to be facial, prima facie evidence that he had some sort of plan. Well, not prima facie evidence that he had some sort of plan. There couldn't be such a thing, but there's Ingo Dollinger saying, a couple different people saying that he had this plan to abdicate and kind of create the contemplative part of the papacy. Right. 2 decades. Unless they're just lying, then it seems like there could have been some sort of, collusion, some sort of agreement, some sort of meeting of the minds where, Martini's like, hey, we don't want you in. We think you're bad, but it looks like you'll probably have the votes. Why don't we give you a short pontificate? You can try out your new little theory, your two pope thing. To me, res ipsa loquitur, the facts kind of suggest a conclusion. You don't buy that at all, though.
the way that I'm reading the evidence about the mafia, I think that they were trapped kind of in the voting process. There was a certain, and I go into the intricacies in the book, but there was a certain point where it became clear that Ratzinger was going to win no matter what. And so they could either keep fighting that fruitlessly, or they could kind of strategize something. And so I think with Martini, I think at different points he tried to meet Ratzinger kind of as an equal and kind of persuade Ratzinger, maybe persuasion isn't always the right word. They had many meetings over the course of Benedict's pontificate, where where Martini was actually saying things like we need movement on divorce and remarriage. We need this, or Benedict. We have at least one record of one meeting that, um, according to the tablet, Martini was basically reprimanded in some way by Benedict for speaking out too loosely on sexual ethics. So the relationship between Martini and Ratzinger is very complicated, but the from Silvestrini, the relationship between Silvestrini and Ratzinger, it's a little more. You can see the pattern of war a little bit more. So I think that they were trapped, and Benedict became Pope, and they knew that he had been thinking about a future Pope resigning, because Murphy O'Connor, Cardinal Cormac Murphy O'Connor, talks about how Benedict had said this, around 2002, that a future Pope might have to resign.
Right.
And so I think they knew that he had this weak point where they could make him a transitional pope if
Right.
they broke him down enough. So I see it less as, I think it's less likely that they made a sort of agreement at the beginning. I think that it's more likely that they wore him down after a long period, to where Benedict thought that resignation, could be the wise thing to do.
Yeah, but I mean, what if there's some inclination that he gave? I mean, somehow they knew this in 2002, Cardinal Murphy O'Connor. What if he kind of referenced that arm in arm with Cardinal Martini in between the third and the fourth scrutinies? I mean, that's not a solemn promise. Okay, you'll get rid of me, and I'll gladly go. But couldn't he have said that? I mean, what else were they talking about at that meeting?
Yeah. No, that's a really intriguing idea. I think a lot of it just a lot of it's this kind of nebulous, like, how do we describe, what's the right word to describe the meeting of the minds, or the someone giving an understanding to someone else. That's kind of the for me the main issue. But I totally think that something mysterious happened in that lunchtime conversation, and it could hold the key to further to what happened later on.
Yeah, and I don't think I don't think good mystery. I mean, I'm not trying to be like I feel like some fatuous reporter that's like tugging at a thread, but I don't think it was legitimately from my heart of hearts. The song of my heart is that I don't think it was a good mystery. When Martini refers to a beautiful surprise, which sounds eerily like Francis's leitmotif of whatever, this god of surprises, that it's hard not to interpolate into that an eventual abdication of the throne. That's just how what else could that mean? There weren't that many beautiful surprises out of the 8-year Benedict pontificate for those guys that I can see. Is there? I mean, what else could it be?
Yeah, That's a great point. I think it's interesting that Marco Politi, who is a very important Italian Vatican expert, he actually he had this book called Joseph Ratzinger, and a lot of the information about the conclave that I'm getting is from his book. But he has this other section of the book where he says that, and this is before Benedict abdicated. He said that a surprise that we might see from Benedict is an abdication, like Benedict hasn't ruled out. He has something to that effect. I have to check the exact language, but he was floating that idea already then. So definitely, like these are questions that demand further scrutiny, and part of the project of the book, I think, is getting a lot of the facts out there, and like some of these episodes, letting them be standalone mysteries, and then letting the reader and future, read more professional readers of the book as well, kind of make their own arguments and whatnot about it.
Yeah, like a reader response approach to literature. You're from the Ivy League. I think that came from the Ivy League. You're really a phenomenal writer. I always enjoy your writing, and your investigative powers for this book were impressive. Tell me this: Cardinal Walter Brandmuller, another German, one of the two surviving opponents to the Sankt Gallen Mafia, no longer really the opponent incarnate being Benedict himself, but really it was the four Dubia cardinals. Along with Cardinal Burke, we have Cardinal Walter Brandmuller, the only two of the four that currently draw air into their lugs. And Brandmuller said this, I'm not sure if you cover this later in your book. He said that first up, it'll be communion for the divorced and civilly remarried. Then women deacons, then married priests, then intercommunion with the Lutherans, and then a complete divide between Protestantism and Catholicism, or something like that. It's not a direct quote, but it was like those 5 steps. Kind of like you're saying about all of the many voices. I said I'd heard 2 or 3. If I total up, we're talking 4, 5, 6 voices, not just Ingo Dollinger, calling a shot. And we have the luxury of retrospection, where we can look back and say they called that shot. That looks really compelling, that they knew ahead of time. Well, that's what I'm saying about Cardinal Walter Brandmuller, who's not a conspiracy theorist. How did he know what the program of Pope Francis would be? Was it just through knowing what the program, the scheme of the Sankt Gallen Mafia was?
Yeah, when we get to the issue of what's kind of the genealogy or the etiology of the different blueprints, it's there's a lot of overlap, I think, because I've been very interested in what the Sankt Gallen Mafia's blueprint is, and I think that they have like multiple iterations or multiple times that they articulate the blueprint, but you also have like different post-conciliar revolutionaries. One that I've looked at a lot is Father Karl Rahner, and Rahner had something called The Shape of the Church to Come in 1972. And what did he talk about in there? He talked about divorced and remarried persons. He talked about the ordination of married men and women. He talked about synodality. He talked about basically, and there's a scholar in Italian named Stefano Fontana who's talked about this. Rahner seems to be prefiguring, Francis. So I think that there's so much overlap in different people, but I think there's the Rahner to the Sankt Gallen Mafia. I think that program, a lot of it would have been very public. Casper is publicly doing the Casper proposal. Other people are public. Casper is publicly doing things with ecumenism, etc.
In the 80s, yeah.
Yeah, but does Cardinal Brandmuller have extra knowledge or wisdom that would make him able to pinpoint this? Probably he knows some special nuances or more things about the genealogy that would it definitely seems to be like he's describing the mafia, definitely.
Yeah. I mean, so in closing, what is a discerning, literate, reading, interested Catholic to make of this almost 8 years into the pontificate of Pope Francis, Bergoglio, whatever you want to call him? We're approaching that time where his time in the chair equals Benedict's. And
Mm-hmm.
I earlier characterized, I want you to respond to this, 90s Bergoglio versus 90s Ratzinger, and it turned out to be a little bit of kind of overblown, outsized false left versus false right. Not true with the left. And this is so typical of secular politics as well. The leftists, they're never false left. They do what they promise. They make good on those promises. They are revolutionaries at heart. Us, we're cucks. We don't get, what did we get out of the Benedict pontificate? I realize that his personal holiness probably surpasses any pope since the council, and I still revere him for that. But in terms of work product, what did he accomplish? It's really meager compared to Francis's 8 years in the chair, if we're looking at this as a left versus right scheme. And I'm not averse to looking at it that way, the way you're supposed to say. So, I mean, is it true that the Sankt Gallen Mafia met from 96 to 2004? Or was that like, just as a quick yes, no?
2005 or 2006.
Okay, so they weren't secretly meeting before or after. They really stopped. I mean, it's very odd, isn't it? As a kind of follow-up to my big parting shot question I'd still like you to respond to. Isn't it odd that they were so paranoid that they would get this Benedict pontificate, but then once they get it, they stop meeting? It seems like they'd be meeting a million times. For them, it would just be twice a year. That would be super frequent, right? Why did they stop meeting during Benedict? And then please respond to what I'm saying about what are we to make of this in 2020 when Francis's pontificate now seems to is about to go longer than Benedict's?
Yeah. So the first question about them meeting, the official narrative, of course, is that they stopped meeting, and they had been in various formal places, and I think their last meeting had like 4 people, and Martini was getting increasingly ill.
Yeah.
But did they kind of transplant their work into another form? I think Night Conversations, this book that Martini did around 2008, one of the Sankt Gallen Mafia members said basically what we were talking about got into that book. So they were doing other things where they, I mean, we don't know if they were also secretly meeting on the side and just not in the Sankt Gallen area anymore.
Right.
So the energy of the group did not. The main idea is that the energy of the group, I don't think it dissipated fully. This idea that they just broke up and went on, nothing happened. I'm not sure I buy that.
Yeah.
The second, I don't know, just an observation, I guess, about what you were saying with Benedict and Bergoglio and 2020. I guess I would say, with Benedict, conservatism, we've had some very interesting thinkers describe conservatism as, potentially just being liberalism in slow motion. And basically, like there's a weakness in some forms of conservatism. And I think that the Benedict pontificate could be kind of an exhibit for that. He did some very important things like Summorum Pontificum, and the war against him was very real, and that's something that the book tries to talk a lot about. But he had weaknesses where it was the slow motion that we were describing, where it's not fully like a restoration. And then I think with Pope Francis, definitely there's this paradox because he's interested in revolution. I think he really is. I mean, his program is a leftist program, but he's also interested in incrementalism at the same time, and he has to negotiate between the two. So it's it's a complex paradigm that you have going on there.
Okay, very last question. This one can be real quick because I've really appreciated your time. Why Sankt Gallen?
I don't know. I think that the fact that Ivo Führer, one of the, he had been the secretary for the CCEE, a kind of precursor of the mafia.
Right.
So he was the bishop of Sankt Gallen, and so it proved to be between the CCE and Ivo Führer, it seemed to be an important place. I don't really go into too much. I know other people have talked more about the Sankt Gallen area and different subversive things that may have been happening there. I kind of don't go too much into that angle in my book. I'm not sure how relevant it was to that actual group.
Yeah, it could be more superficial. Well, look, Julia Meloni, what's the name of the book? Is it working title?
It's going to be the Sankt Gallen Mafia: How a Radical Group of Cardinals Plotted Pope Francis's Revolution.
Excellent. Okay, well, thanks for your time, and I'd love to bring you back on once the book gets published. So thanks a lot, Julia. Everyone out there, please like this show, hit the bell. If you haven't subscribed, do that for heaven's sakes. And thank you very much. Have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Bye, Julie.
Bye.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst